All right, welcome back to ABA exam review and the continuation of our BCBA practice question series, where we're going through another set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. Be sure to check out behavioranalyststudy.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack. When you pass your exam, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. An analyst is evaluating a new classroom management protocol. During the first week, the analyst notices the teaching staff are providing more frequent praise and delivering fewer reprimands than in previous weeks. However, after the analyst stops observing sessions in person, classroom behavior gradually returns to baseline levels. Which of the following best explains the change in staff behavior? So a longer question with some longer answer choices, but that's not going to overwhelm us or make us panic, because in a lot of cases, these can actually be very straightforward questions as long as we take our time and attack the question and understand what it's asking for. We're looking for what explains the change in staff behavior. Now, we know the analyst is looking at this classroom management protocol. During the first week, the analyst sees the teaching staff are giving more praise, delivering fewer reprimands, which is great. However, when the analyst stops observing sessions, classroom behavior returns to baseline levels. So what is the idea that the observation or someone observing someone else can lead to a change in behavior? That's what we're thinking about here. A, treatment integrity improved because staff were receiving in-the-moment feedback. Well, one, it doesn't say anything about feedback from the analyst. And two, we know once observation stopped, treatment integrity went back to what it was. So A does not fit. B, observer drift occurred because the analyst's presence influenced data collection accuracy. Now, we are looking at a situation where the analyst's presence did affect the behavior, but it wasn't necessarily the data collection. What happened was reactivity. The teaching staff were reacting to the observation from the analyst. So reactivity occurred because the presence of the analyst temporarily altered staff behavior. The best way to think about this is when you are conducting supervision, that session is going to look different no matter what. The text can act different, the kid will act different, the stakeholder is going to act different just because you're there. Reactivity is very, very powerful. You have to be aware of reactivity anytime you're observing. And then D, positive reinforcement occurred because staff received social attention from the analyst. Well, if positive reinforcement had occurred, they would have continued doing what they were doing, which they did not. So the answer here is C. Again, a longer question with long answer choices, but since we attacked the question, it's actually a very straightforward answer. At a daycare, children initially become very excited when a new musical toy is introduced, frequently pressing the button to activate music. After an hour, their frequency of activating the toy decreases, although the toy's volume and sound quality remain constant. Which of the following best explains the reduced engagement? So let's think about this, right? We have a situation where children are excited when a new musical toy is introduced, and they keep pressing the button to activate the music. But after a while, the frequency of using the toy decreases, and they're no longer as impacted, to say, about the toy and the toy's music. Now, what might explain the reduced engagement to this toy? Because when we think about it, when you press the button, the music comes on, and it, as the question says, makes the children excited. As it plays more and more, the less exciting it is, so to speak. How can we explain that? A, sensory adaptation from constant auditory stimulation. Be very careful about sensory on your exam and in practice. When we talk about sensory is tied to the automatic function, right? We're not experts outside of that. So be very careful with an answer like A, which doesn't really fit into what we're looking at. B, habituation, as the music loses its novelty effect. That's definitely a possibility. What is habituation? Habituation occurs with the repeated presentation of a stimulus, and the reaction to that stimulus reduces as the presentation occurs more and more. So they're definitely going through some sort of habituation with this musical toy. C, negative punishment because access to music is lost. Well, not necessarily. If anything, they would be gaining access to music. They have access to music because they can continue pressing the button to get more music, and there's no indication that losing access has prevented it. Again, the toy's volume and sound quality remain constant, so it's still there. Dehabilitation, as the children learn to tolerate the music. Now, habilitation and habituation are different things. Habituation is the reduction in response to a stimulation as that stimulation is repeatedly introduced. Habilitation is adapting someone to a natural environment, introducing the more and more reinforcement and reducing the punishment, right? You're habilitating them into a classroom or into a work environment. Habituation is much more respondent in nature, where it's just a reduction in response. So the best explanation here is B. Kind of a tricky question. Lauren, a behavior analyst, is consulting for a school district to address a high rate of classroom disruptions by a fourth grade student. The student frequently makes loud noises and gets out of his seat during independent work. Lauren suspects that the disruptions might be serving multiple functions, including attention from peers and escape from academic tasks. Which of the following is the most appropriate assessment strategy to determine the primary functions of the disruptive behavior? Okay, when a question like this comes up, it's even longer than that first question. And if, let's say, you're 2 hours into the exam, you might be a little tired, and you might see this, and it might cause anxiety or some panic. We've just got to remember in that moment, attack the question, right? We're ready, we're prepared, let's attack. Question wants to know, what's the appropriate assessment to determine the primary function of the disruptive behavior? Now, you can answer that without even knowing the rest of the information, right? What assessment should we use to determine the function of a behavior? A functional analysis, right? The functional analysis is the best way to determine a function. So if we're consulting for a school district because of disruptions by a fourth grade student, they're making loud noises, getting out of work, and Lauren suspects there might be multiple functions like attention and escape. If you want to determine the function, a functional analysis is going to be your best bet. Well, let's look at A, right? That's our prediction. Let's look at A. Conduct a descriptive assessment such as ABC data collection across various classroom settings to identify patterns of antecedents and consequences. Well, that's great. That's going to help us identify possible consequences, possible reasons, but descriptive assessments don't give you the function, right? They might lead you down that path, but they're not going to give you the function. B, implement a brief functional analysis, systematically manipulating conditions to observe the behavior's response patterns. Well, there we go, right? We've got our brief FA. We're going to manipulate conditions and try to find out if our hypothesis of attention and escape is actually true. C, administer indirect assessments. Well, we can stop reading right there, but we never do, right? An indirect assessment is never going to give us the functions, right? Interviews with students, teachers, and parents are not how we determine function. And then D, begin directly implementing a non-contingent reinforcement procedure with attention and compare its effects to an escape-based NCR procedure. What's wrong with D? Well, we don't know the function yet, so we don't want to start intervening without actually knowing the function. So to determine the function, we're going to implement that brief FA, manipulate conditions to observe the behavior's response patterns. A client's family gives Tony, a behavior technician, an expensive sports jersey at the end of a session as a thank you. The family insists it is just a gift to show appreciation for hard work. As Tony's supervisor, how should you advise Tony on how to handle the situation? Okay, so you're in an ethical situation, and part of your job as a supervisor is to help your RBTs through these scenarios. If Tony is given this expensive jersey as a thank you, and the family is insistent that it's just a gift to show appreciation, how would you advise Tony on how to handle this or all gifts in general? A, refuse the gift no matter what. Well, no, not anymore, right? There are situations where we can accept gifts. B, accept the gift regardless of price if it is not a routine thing. Well, it's important that it's not routine, but the price does matter. C, the gift must be non-routine and under $10 for Tony to accept it. Yes, good. That's the rule of thumb. Under $10, non-routine. D, take the gift, but then immediately get rid of it after session. No, we want to avoid that. That gives a false impression of what is and isn't allowed. You've got to just nip ethical scenarios in the bud. Don't beat around the bush. You've got to just nip it in the bud and lay out how things are to work, right? It's better in the long run. So the gift must be non-routine and under $10 for Tony to accept it. A behavior analyst is working with a client who engages in hitting others to gain attention. The analyst decides to implement a differential reinforcement of other behavior procedure. Which of the following best describes how the DRO procedure would be applied in this scenario? So how are we going to apply a DRO procedure in this scenario? We have a client who engages in hitting to gain attention, and we want to use the DRO. Well, what is a DRO? A DRO occurs when we reinforce for the behavior not happening. So immediately we have to know or think we're going to reinforce when hitting doesn't occur. So that's kind of what we're looking for. A, the hitting behavior itself would be ignored. Okay, that's half of it, right? Maybe. But with the differential reinforcement, we've also got to have that reinforcement part. B, the client would receive attention for engaging in any behavior that isn't hitting after a certain amount of time of no hitting. Good, right? We would provide the attention for engaging in a behavior that isn't hitting as long as there was no hitting for a certain amount of time. B looks pretty good. C, the client would receive attention for hitting others only after a specific amount of time has passed without any hitting incidents. Well, we're not going to give attention for hitting others. That's what we're trying to eliminate. D, the client would receive attention only for engaging in a specific other behavior, like asking politely for a turn with a toy. In DRO, we're not specifying an alternate behavior, right? That's what's wrong with D. We're just trying to get the behavior not to occur. So in this scenario, we're going to give attention for engaging in a behavior that isn't hitting after a certain amount of time of no hitting. Thanks for watching. Some challenging questions today. I hope you did well. If not, as always, keep working hard, keep at it. You will get there. Check out behavioranalyststudy.com for all of our study materials. When you pass your exam, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.